Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me? I have to stoop on these things. Good afternoon. Thanks for attending this session. My name is Graham Slatt. I'm the Scholarly Communications and Copyright Librarian at the University of Toronto Libraries. I'm here today to facilitate this session and the panel session and the Q&A. This panel brings together 3 different stories or perspectives about Subscribe to Open. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar or simply need a bit of a refresher before we start, Subscribe to Open is sort of a catch-all term for a diverse set of publishing initiatives which have in common the wish to sustain the open publication of content by leveraging existing procurement infrastructure and channels from the subscription world into a situation where publications and publication programs can publish fully open access without the need to depend for revenue on author fees, and can depend on the other side for revenue on library budgets or other subscription-based monies that people would be willing to proffer. Our panelists today are all involved in working with Subscribe to Open in different ways, and all are also members of the Subscribe to Open community of practice, which we will hear about today. Our first speaker is Andrea Lopez, the Director of Sales, Partnerships, and Initiatives at Annual Reviews. After that, we'll hear from Antonia Popp, who is Vice President of the Journals Division of University of Toronto Press. And finally, our last speaker will be Curtis Brundy, who is the Associate University Librarian for Scholarly Communications and Collections at Iowa State University. So we'll have 3 shortish presentations and then hopefully some time left for a Q&A. And I'll pass things over to Andrea.
Thank you, Graham. It's nice to see everybody. I see a lot of members of the community of practice that I'm used to seeing you in a little Zoom box, so it's fun to see everybody in person here. I'm going to jump right in. I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about annual reviews, about why we went open access, why a new model, how it's worked for us so far, and then talk a little bit about the community of practice. So annual reviews, I'm not going to read through our whole mission statement, but I want you to pay attention to the last part, which is the benefit of society. We were actually founded by scientists to serve the scientific community, and we've done a really great job of that since 1932 through our institutional subscriptions that service that research community. But it has evolved, our mission evolved probably within the last 7 years to also benefit society. And as our name implies, we solely publish reviews, and they're all invited review articles. And so why did we move to open access? When we actually, reviews up until very recently, and when we started to look for a new model, they did not fall under mandates. But we really felt like the review is the actual, should be available to everybody, because in our case, the experts have gone out, they've reviewed all the literature, they've synthesized it, integrated it into an article where people can start their research on a particular subject. We really felt that there could be a benefit to society, particularly if policymakers, people who had to make decisions outside of the academic and research community could have access to the reviews. And why a new model? People said, but there's already models. Why are you looking for something new? In our case, as I said, we do purely invited reviews. So you can't really invite someone to spend their time writing a review article and then hand them an invoice and then have them not have any funding to pay that invoice. And in addition, we tend to, because we look for the leading experts, they come from a small number of institutions. So the onus would fall on a small number of institutions to pay for the access, yet we have readers all over the world. So we worked with Raym Crow from the Chainbridge Group to develop the Subscribe to Open model. And it's a very simple model. We ask libraries to continue to subscribe to the annual reviews that they have. If we get all of our renewals in and we take into account the normal churn and the market conditions, then we will publish that year's volume under a CCBY license. If we don't, then those who subscribe have access, but the journal is not published under a CCBY license. It's a very simple model. Everything stays the same. We use the same infrastructure. If you order through consortia, you can order through consortia. There's no complicated agreements. There's no tracking of anything. There's no additional cost either for the publisher or for the library. It uses your existing budgets and your existing staff. It applies to readers all over the world, as well as authors. It applies to all disciplines and institutions, and it's an equitable model. For us at N Reviews, we did know that we had to have some benefits that were solely for subscribers, so our reviews in advance, those are still behind a paywall, but when the version of record publishes, that is under a CCBY license. Everybody, and I think for all the subscribed open publishers, you're guaranteed permanent rights as a subscriber, regardless of what happens with the author. And as I said, up until recently, reviews did not fall under mandates, but that's changing. We saw that with the UKRI open access policy. We saw some of that in the OSTP memo, that reviews would start. So at some point, we were going to have to find a way to do this, but this means we would not have to charge any APCs under this model. It also means library subscription budgets have a greater impact. So we opened up 8 titles. We started with the N Review of Public Health. That we received a grant from the R.W. Johnson Foundation in 2017, and the grant was 2-part. The first part was to open up access to a journal and see if there was an impact. And the second part was to develop the model. So we started with 1, and then we had our real test was in 2020 when we had 5 journals go open access, and we added 3 more in 2021, making a total of 8, and then we remained with the 8 for 2022. And all of them have successfully published open access under the subscribed open model. And the usage of the journals has been amazing. 40% of our usage comes from these 8 journals, which are only 16% of our portfolio. Early today, and in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail, but earlier today, I talked about where we're seeing this usage coming from. And it's really a long tail of institutions that would normally have no budget or have a need to subscribe to everything. So they're taking 1 or 2 here, but it's a lot of things. We see police departments around the world. We've seen election offices. We're seeing it in places what we know that part of benefiting society, we see that we are fulfilling that part of our mission by who's using it. And looking ahead, we will be using the subscribe to open model for all 51 of our journals for 2023. Our original plan had been to add a few journals, and when we got to our 100th anniversary in 2032, we would have it be fully open, but when we saw the usage, we didn't want to keep that content from the people who were using it and needed it. There's also an increased use of the subscribe to open model. There's 96 journals right now from 12 publishers, and it's projected that there'll be 151 journals from 17 publishers next year. Part of that, Graham mentioned earlier, was the subscribe to open community of practice, and that's a group of us. It's librarians, publishers, funders, sales agents, and anyone with an interest in the model. We meet once a month. We talk about our experiences. We share. We communicate as a group. So if you have any interest at all in joining that group, please let me know. And again, that means that we're really working in partnership, all of us together in the ecosystem. And I will hand it off to Antonia.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Graham said, I'm Antonia Popp, and I'm with University of Toronto Press. I'll tell you a little bit about the University of Toronto Press and our journey using Subscribe to Open. University of Toronto Press has been around since 1901. We've had a few conversations with Andrea in annual reviews, and one of the things that struck me early on is that we actually share a part of our mission. Similar to annual reviews, UTP's mission is the dissemination of knowledge for the benefit of society. Those exact words are used there. So that should probably tell you a little bit about what we aim to achieve in all of the parts of our business. We publish 47 journals, about 2,000 new articles a year in a variety of disciplines, social sciences, humanities, as well as some medical. We publish about 200 new titles in our book publishing unit per year, and that's a combination of monographs, text, and trade. We operate a distribution center serving customers, publishers in the US, in Canada, and the UK, and we manage the University of Toronto campus bookstores, and there are 5 of those. And what we especially love about that experience is that it gives us a direct relationship with the student life on campus. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been doing with respect to open access so far. And we have been on an open access journey for about a decade now. In our book publishing, we were one of the early partners with Knowledge Unlatched and Tome. And over the past several years, I'm looking at my colleague Graham on the panel, we've been working with the University of Toronto Libraries for the publication of open access books. This is a partnership that allows us to publish without any embargo, a series of books each year. And included on this slide are a few of the titles, and this is just a sample. But I hope it gives you an idea of the kinds of books that we think are critical to the community at large beyond academia. So we published something recently on Ukraine. It's a critical moment in history, right? And we published on indigenous writing, BIPOC experiences, and so forth. In our journals, we use three models for open access. We do publish a couple of journals with APCs, and we publish a couple of journals without APCs on the diamond model with help from research institutes. Our newest model is the subscribe to open model, and I will get to that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about why subscribe to open. In 2020, we published a book called Solved by David Miller. David Miller is an economist and a lawyer by trade, and he also served as mayor of Toronto for a period in the 2000s. And since leaving office, Miller became involved with the C40 group, which is a global network of mayors working together to drive action at the city level to address the climate crisis. So in 2020, as I say, Miller and University of Toronto Press partnered on the publication of the book called Solved, which focuses on what some of the world's largest cities are already doing to address the climate crisis. When Miller's editor contacted him, inviting him to do a second book with us, he said he'd love to. And in addition, he'd love to talk about a journal, because the C40 group had just launched a think tank within C40 dedicated to developing and analyzing research for the benefit of these cities that are working to address climate change. And on this slide is a map of the member cities of C40. It is very much a global organization, and these 97 cities account for about 25% of the global economy. You might be wondering why cities. Cities make up about 2% of the global landmass, and yet they consume about 75% of the world's energy. And about 70% of energy-related greenhouse gases originate in cities. And cities account for about 80% of the world GDP. So our journal aims to provide to policymakers research, data, evidence-based, peer-reviewed data to help drive action. So this is all about getting things done. We are inviting in the authorship pool authors from the global north, authors from the global south. We are inviting in the authorship pool researchers and policymakers. And we are inviting researchers at the early stages of their career and at their advanced stages of their career. This is really about bringing together the voices, the perspectives that are necessary to drive action quickly. And so that is why subscribe to open. When we started thinking about the kind of access model that would serve a journal such as this, it was, I have to say, a fairly easy decision. We had been observing the success that Annual Reviews has had with the model, and we have been great admirers of the subscribe to open model since we first heard about it. And what we really, really felt we needed to achieve here is the opportunity for open readership for everyone with an interest. And at the same time, the opportunity to publish without APCs. I mentioned earlier that UTP does publish a couple of journals with APCs. We are very selective about where to use an APC model. In a case such as the climate journal that I was just telling you about, where we want to bring together the voices from the Global South. We all know that climate, like many other issues, disproportionately affect different groups. We felt that an APC model would be doing a disservice to the journal's mission and to the world more broadly. Andrea told you about some of the benefits of S2O. I would just point to a couple on this slide in addition. Equity, I think, is probably what bands us all together. When we think about the community of practice, every member of the community of practice is there because there is an interest in open and there's an interest in equity. And that, I think, is the most important benefit of a subscribe to open model. Similar to annual reviews, we also felt that we had to offer some pragmatic reasons to subscribe. And so we are offering, for example, an open access publish guarantee, which I think is a little bit unique to the model so far. And that's also one of the beautiful aspects of subscribe to open in that different publishers and groups can adjust the model to suit different publications and programs. You're probably wondering what are the challenges. Similar to launching any new journal, there are challenges around building a community. In this particular case, we're getting quite a bit of interest from the authorship community, and we have a number of special topics and themes lined up. But communicating how our journal is unique is always a challenge, of course. What is unique to a subscribe to open launch, I would say, is how do you develop pricing and how do you determine what a threshold might be? So we also worked with Ram Crow. You could probably tell I have a lot of admiration for annual reviews. We also worked with Ram on developing our model, and we did quite a bit of extensive analysis in terms of the institutions and the research center across the world that we hope will support the journal and participate in the journal as readers and authors as well. And in determining the pricing, we came up with a 4-tier model. I don't mind sharing $285 a year on the low end and $715 on the high end. And the distinctions have to do with the size of the institution and the research intensity of the institution. And probably, I would say, the biggest challenge so far, and also maybe an opportunity, there is a proliferation of open access models, and explaining how S2O is different and how S2O is perhaps more beneficial in this particular case than some of the other models is a constant exercise. So I think one of the things that I have found most rewarding is being a member of the community of practice and speaking to members of the scholarly communication community more broadly. You learn so much in every conversation, and all of the conversations, I think, contribute a little bit and a little bit and a little bit more to the model each day. In terms of our roadmap, we are hoping to reach our threshold by March, in which case we will achieve a flip. I will also say that the first issue of the journal published in October, and it is open access without subscriptions or any kind of support. We did that intentionally to allow the community to see a sample of what we aim to achieve. And for 2023, we hope to achieve a flip in the early part of the year. Looking beyond that, I mentioned that we publish 47 journals, and we are looking, to achieve success in this particular journal and to achieve success with the model, with the intent that for 2024 and beyond, we might be looking to add more journals into an S2O program. So I'll leave it there, and I'll pass it over to Curtis.
Well, thank you, Antonia. I just think that's such a powerful story. I think that a lot of the conversations I've had around Subscribe to Open is taking things we already subscribe to and flipping them to Subscribe to Open. So to start a brand new journal To me, it doesn't seem that difficult. We do pick up new subscriptions at my library, and we would, of course, pick up new subscriptions to Subscribe to Open journals. So a little bit about Iowa State, where I work. We're a signatory of OA 2020. We've made a commitment to transition fully our paywalled subscription spend to support for open access. We've been working on this for probably 4 years, I would say. We've converted about a third of our subscription spend, about $2 million, to support open access, various types of models. I will say that Subscribe to Open, hands down, is our preferred model. And I'm just going to walk through some of the reasons why that is. And I only have one slide, so you can see from my slide I'm going to repeat some of the advantages that my co-presenters have already touched on. But I'm going to talk about it from the institutional perspective, from the library perspective. And from the library perspective, it's really, really simple. So we're doing a few larger APC read and publish style agreements. And you know, when we've only done a third of we've only flipped a third of the spend to open access, I think it's maybe not too much of a burden. But when you're doing those types of read and publish agreements, there's author verification, there's workflows that come along with that. You have to track, you know, if it's capped or uncapped, how many articles are coming out. With Subscribe to Open, there really isn't any of that. You know, 1 year you pay your traditional subscription invoice. The next year you pay the Subscribe to Open invoice. And that's really it. And the content is open. So the simplicity of it, to me, is really, really important. And I know for publishers that, you know, publishers that are thinking about the OSTP memo and how you're going to make that transition. I'm on the advisory board, the library advisory board for science for AAAS, and that group just met. And I think we all know that they're going to do this zero embargo approach to try and, you know, get compliance with that. And that's all well and good. We're not going to cancel our subscription to science, but we're really interested in seeing the version of record come out. That's what we're paying for. We don't want to see the author accepted manuscript. And I think that rather than a green route, I would say that Subscribe to Open really deserves investigation if you want to get into whichever way this OSTP thing goes. If you need to move to open, I think Subscribe to Open deserves your attention. And then the equity piece here is just gigantic. I mean, I feel like this has been a major focus in our library and in our conversation with publishers, you know, for the last couple of years. And in some ways, I've given up hope that these APC-based models will ever achieve equity. The more we look into and scratch the surface of the waiver programs and the discount programs, you know, that's a Band-Aid solution on just a hemorrhaging, gaping wound. It's never going to solve the problem. And Subscribe to Open has equity built right into the front of it. So you don't have to come in as an afterthought and figure out, how are you not going to exclude the authors from the Global South? How are you not going to exclude unaffiliated authors who are not under any agreement? So to me, the equity side, the equity advantage of Subscribe to Open is just way beyond any other model that's out there right now. And the last thing I would just mention is the speed. You know, so again, we've been making these open access agreements and pursuing them and having so many conversations, and we've only managed to convert a third of the spend over about 4 years. I really don't want to still be working toward this like at year 10. You know, it would be great to accelerate this. It would be great to get this other $4 million that we're still pouring into paywall content to opening up content. That's what we would like to do. And I think Subscribe to Open is the best model in order to accelerate this transition to open access. And the last thing I would just say is that as a librarian participant of the Subscribe to Open community of practice, this has been one of the best experiences of my professional life taking part in that group. It is a cross-stakeholder group of people that came together voluntarily to do something, as Antonia said, because we have common values. We appreciate the equity of this model. We want to see it more widely adopted and successful. And it's been remarkably rewarding. And I think that there's room in that community for more librarians to take part, because I think there's a lot of work still to educate and to socialize our colleagues about this model and how it might fit in an equitable, open collection strategy. So I would encourage any librarians who are not taking part in it to drop in on a call and take part. You'll learn a lot, you'll meet some nice folks, and it's been really rewarding for me. So that's my institutional perspective on Subscribe to Open. I'm a huge supporter, and I'm thrilled. I didn't know we were going to have so many new publishers adopting the model, so it's quite exciting. And it's great to see so many people here that are interested in learning more about it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Andrea, Antonia, and Curtis. We have the mic up front. If any of you have a question, we do need to speak into the mic. Is it mobile, the mic? Looks like it is. Oh, now it's on. So if you do have a question, stand up so that your question will be recorded on the stream.
John Lavender from Maverick Publishing Specialists. Just a question for Andrea. Have you had any of your journals where you didn't get enough response from the libraries to flip it to a Subscribe to Open?
No, we had 8 of the journals in the pilot, and all of those successfully opened. So we're just now, it's a little early in the renewal season. So far, the renewals that have come in have all come in at their 100% renewal. So, but we have a long way to go before the end of this year and into next year. But the 8 journals that were in the pilot for the last 3 years have all successfully published OA.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I have so many questions, but I'll stick with one for right now. This is maybe a newbie question or proves that I wasn't paying attention properly, but is it consistent across all Subscribe to Open models that there is no APC then for publishing the article? Or is it variable?
I think it is consistent, but I'm looking at my colleagues from the community of practice to make sure that I'm not misspeaking.
I believe that there's no APCs, but I do, and I don't want to call out who they are, but I do think there's a publisher that's doing Subscribe to Open where there are some other author-facing charges. I don't know if they're the color charges or what they are, but the idea is to get away from all of that. But from a publishing perspective, I've come to appreciate how complicated it is to replace a revenue stream. But I think in general, the idea is in most of the publishers, there's no author-facing charges, and that's certainly the goal.
Tushar Shakya from Canadian Science Publishing. You know, we've been talking to you guys and trying to understand this and see how it worked for us. And sitting through all the sessions this week, I kind of had a thing, and I'm wondering how you're managing this. So you have a successful year where you flipped all your content, everything's CCBY, and then the renewal time comes. And if institutions who are renewing are using GR1 reports, the usage is going to show up at 0, correct? So how are you educating and making sure that you're getting people to come back in when they're using that kind of methodology to support renewals?
That's fine. When you're saying the GR1, is that's the open access report?
No, the report that only shows paywall content used for the past year.
Well, that's been interesting because I had the opposite question this morning where they
Yeah.
said, you know, these journals are open access, but they're not showing up on the open access report.
Yeah.
So right now they're still showing up on the paywall report. And I think that's something that we have to talk about with Counter is how are we going to count the subscribe, because you're still subscribing, but they're open. So right now they're not showing as an OA because they in our case, they flip throughout the year. Our journals don't all publish on January 1st.
Right.
So that's a very good point, and one that after the question this morning, I think we need to look into how do we differentiate that in those reports.
Great,
It's a
thank
good
you.
question, thanks.
And I guess I would add that, you know, we don't look at usage the way that we used to. Like the way that we're determining value now, we've rewritten our collection policy. We've centered like our DEI values in it. So to us, like those traditional metrics of local usage and cost per use, we really don't think in terms of that anymore. I mean, it's not that it's something that we don't consider, but we're also looking at a lot of other factors when we're making our decisions. And I would encourage, and I know other librarians are doing the same thing. I think there's a lot of talk in libraries right now about aligning these traditional collection spends, which in the case of like Iowa State, that's half of the library's budget is what we're buying and leasing. And that money really needs to be in alignment with, the library's values and the institution's values. And that doesn't always boil down to a simple quantitative metric like cost per use. So I would do some nudging as well if you're having a conversation with librarians that maybe they need to think in terms of some other things like their own institutional values.
I could actually add something to that as well. We've been thinking also about this question of measuring impact, as Chris was just talking about. And we will be offering or presenting to subscribing institutions some kind of impact report, and it will try to capture usage from within the institution as well as usage more broadly. And it will also try to capture the author side of things, how many submissions, how many papers published, that kind of thing. And this is perhaps a little bit ambitious, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'd like to look at real world impact. And I could give you a very specific example. In the October issue of the Climate Journal that we just published, we published a piece by the mayor of Oslo talking about a climate budget, which functions in the same way as a financial budget, but it's looking at things like emissions and reducing emissions. And I'd love for, in 2024 to see other cities having a climate budget following our publication of a piece about climate budgets, if you see what I mean with that. So this question about how do we get at impact is a critical question. That's, if we all agree that our mission as publishers is to disseminate knowledge, how do we measure that?
Go ahead.
So I said I had a lot of questions. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Athena Hepner from the University of Central Florida, and I envy what you just described because our experience is not there yet. Instead, our budget tends to be by the skin of our teeth every year, declining. If you look at the inflation rate, we're not meeting an increase yearly to cover increasing cost. So when we're looking at Subscribe to Open, we so far have kept all of our subscriptions and participate in several Subscribe to Open things. But when we do have to face a cut, it's probably not just the University of Central Florida, it's probably at least all of the state-funded universities in Florida and possibly in the entire country facing the same economic situation. So for Subscribe to Open, it may be very tempting in those situations to look at them and say, they're already open, we'll rely on everyone else to maintain their subscriptions this year, and we'll look at picking it up again later, if ever. How do you buffer against that? And also, is it a year-to-year business model where you're saying, I got the number of subscribers I needed this year, so we're open this year, or is it looking out, say, we will be open for the next 3 years, and if we don't get the funding subscriptions next year, then the year after that period, we can't be open. How does that work? Where's the continuity over at least a 5-year span when our budgets are very fluctuating?
For us that end reviews, it is a year to year. So if we were to see that happen, that we'd have to take maybe that risk that 1 year, but then the next year we'd have to start again. So we would have to come back and say, we didn't make it. Now, we haven't seen that happen yet. We've done this for 3 years now, but that's not to say, as you said, it couldn't happen. But we are doing year to year. We are trying to get into more, particularly with our consortia, more 3 to 5 year deals so that we have a better idea of what's going to happen.
And I think you described the situation in Iowa as well. Like, we're not getting new money. Budgets have been either static or declining since I got there 5 years ago. What has changed is how we think about allocating, this dwindling pot of money that we have. And back to the values, what we have put in place are a different set of criteria for when we need to make the next round of cuts. And when we need to make the next round of cuts, The things that are going to be on the chopping block are the things that are not in alignment with values. That's going to be the paywalled spend. It's not going to be the subscribe to open spend. It's not going to be the other open things that we're supporting, from infrastructure to advocacy, that's trying to create this new open scholarly communication world that really is in alignment with institutional mission. And I'm not saying it's perfect and we don't have a lot of outreach and education yet to do on our campus, but we've been working at that. Like, we developed new journal negotiation principles. We took those through the library to library leadership, to our faculty advisory board. We took those all the way out to our full faculty senate, and they advocate for 3 simple things. We're gonna shift over to open access. We're gonna pursue open access. We're gonna pursue financial sustainability, and we're going to pursue transparency, because I feel like there's got to be an injection of transparency in all of this stuff that we're doing if we're ever going to control costs. So I think if you do that work in anticipation of hard times coming, then when you need to make the cuts, it's all of a sudden when you keep subscribed open and you cancel, whatever. We could cancel probably 3 Elsevier journals and cover the cost of all of the subscribed open. And I'm sad to say that. Like, we just did a financial analysis of that $2 million we're spending, and only about 2% of it is going towards subscribed open. We're spending over $900,000 on our open access agreement with Wiley. So we're still totally out of whack with even how we're spending our open access money. But we just have got to keep nudging publishers in the direction of equity, in the direction of sustainable models, and hopefully those percentages will change over time.
Hi, I'm Esther Jackson from Columbia University. I was just curious to know if the Subscribe to Open community of practice prioritizes a particular kind of licensing for the works that are flipped and opened, even if it is like a temporary openness. Thank you.
The community of practice, we don't, I think as a group, we haven't said it has to be CCBY, it has to be this. So each publisher decides on their own what license they want to use. And actually at the community of practice, we don't set any rules, we just have a general discussions. And so far, there hasn't been anything that's come up where we said, oh, no, that's not allowed. So we're a very open group who try to work together.
Another question? I've got some backups if we run out.
Lots of questions.
Seriously, other
We
people
paid her.
just like, So I do have another question, and maybe this one seems less confrontational, I hope. And that is, when you have these subscribe to open, and there is no APC for your authors, if it's a read and publish, the authors have to go through all these hoops. Usually they have to accept, that they have to be informed about the agreement and then accept that they want to go open access and all of these hoops. With subscribe to or read and publish, I'm getting it backwards. You get the subscribe to open, they don't have those hoops. Read and publish, they do. But how do you then tell the authors that there's this great opportunity for them to publish in these subscribe to open journals? Are you doing outreach, and how has the response been?
I could start. We've been doing quite a bit of outreach to authors to communicate about the model, and we have an open access publish guarantee for authors, and it has raised some questions. Is that an APC? No, it's not an APC, right? So you're absolutely right. The outreach is critical. So we try to, have very clear FAQs and continued outreach to authors is explain there are no APCs, and yet there is the opportunity for open. One of the questions that we've gotten actually from members of our editorial board is how can we support it? And that's the talk to your library piece. So it is quite a bit of communication for sure.
I'll do my best to answer this. I think our editor-in-chief who communicates with our authors is here in the room, but we have our editorial committees. Each of our journals has, and it's clearly explained at those editorial meetings, and I believe when they invite the authors, they explain this to them. Am I correct on that? Okay. Thank you.
I think this will be our last question.
I like the S2O model. I just worry about it when I think about it. But in practical terms, I don't know if you've thought about this, how realistic is it to say that you can now flip a journal back from open to closed? Because, I know the theory sounds fine, but in practice, once you've got manuscripts accepted, so you're going to tell the authors if you've flipped, sorry guys, you're going to have to go somewhere else, we're not going to make it open. Have you modeled that, or is it just, you're just hoping it never happens?
I'll start again. What we actually tell authors at the type of acceptance is that it may be open in order to get at that issue. And again, it goes back to the author communication piece. How do we communicate to authors? So we do let authors know in advance that it may be open. I think this is also common for all of the S2O publishers, but I'll look for my colleagues to correct me. Once it's open, once a volume year is open, it doesn't become closed. So it's next year's offer that is under the, goes through the opportunity of becoming open or not. And the cycle renews itself annually in order so that any content that becomes open remains open, and likewise for the future, it hopefully becomes open again.
We're a little bit different in that we invite the authors. So upon invitation, we can make, so we're not taking submissions, so that there is a big difference there. So upon invitation, they're informed that this may be open, and it's highly likely it will be open, but we do inform them of that. And we do give them a backup as the green OA route.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us on this late afternoon session.
Yeah, thank you.